your closing moment. Hey everyone, I'm Matthew Cornwell with Get Taped here in Atlanta, Georgia, one of Atlanta's original audition taping services, which I co-own with my amazingly talented, beautiful wife, Brooke. In our last video, we covered the all-important opening moment in your self-taped audition. Link in the show notes below. And thanks to a comment from Tommy Groth, we decided to bring you the companion video about your closing moment. Specifically, we're going to talk about buttons. And I don't mean the fasteners on your shirt. But before we talk about buttons, let's make an overall, albeit obvious, point. And that is your entire audition should be grounded and authentic. In other words, there should be no weak point in your performance where you phone it in or do less prep. That said, if you don't close your audition well, it can leave a weird impression on the viewer. I learned after 15 years of improv that sometimes the final moment in a scene is what the audience remembers most. Sometimes it's the only moment they remember. Now, the live audience doesn't have the benefit of playback, whereas the casting director watching your audition does. Nevertheless, you don't want to compromise that stellar performance with a not-so-stellar ending. So let's talk about that ending. In numerous Q&As that I've heard with casting directors, a very common question comes up, which is, what do you think about buttons? And you'll get a variety of answers. So it's actually incumbent upon you, the actor, to get to know what are the idiosyncrasies of the casting directors in your market. In the Atlanta market, there are no less than 12 casting directors, and each one feels subtly different about this topic. But wait, what is a button? Well, a lot of people would define it as adding a line of dialogue at the end of your audition, especially when the other character has the final line of dialogue in the script. However, I think this definition reveals the actor's obsession with words. When we get a script, the first thing we do is count how many lines, count how many paragraphs, count how many words we have. But we're relying too much on word count. Here's a thought exercise. Imagine any classic scene from a soap opera. Doesn't matter which one. Specifically that moment right before the commercial break or right before that cliffhanger at the end of the episode. What is that last 5 seconds before the scene fades to black? Is it a verbal button? No. It's almost always a 5-second nonverbal reaction to that last line of dialogue. You know, that moment where the camera slowly pushes in on the actor as they react to the news that their evil twin survived the plane crash and is coming back for revenge. So hopefully that ridiculous example can broaden your understanding of what a button can be. And if we choose to define a button as both verbal and nonverbal, then the point that I'm going to make is, yes, always have a button. You should always have a very intentional final moment to your audition. It might be a brisk exit, or maybe it's a slow exit. It might be that 5-second soap opera reaction shot, or more specifically, maybe your character is connecting the dots about what just transpired, giving you one last emotional shift. Or, in rare cases, it might be an added line of dialogue. But you need to be so smart about this. Like I mentioned before, you need to know the likes and dislikes of the casting director for which you're auditioning. You also must do research on the writer, showrunner, director, and or producer to determine whether it's a gamble to ad-lib or not. For instance, Matthew Weiner, the writer of Mad Men, does not respond well to ad-libs. On the other hand, Adam McKay, when he was directing movies like Anchorman 2, loves improv. So you need to do your research. But if you don't have time to do that research, or you just can't find any answers, then you should default to not adding any verbal buttons at the end of your audition. Stick to the script and figure out a nonverbal button instead. But let's just say you've done your research and you've determined that it is appropriate to add an extra line of dialogue at the end. Well, what should it be? This is where you also have to be smart. Resist the urge to shine in that moment. This is not your chance to stand out or make a bold choice. It will backfire. And the casting director, if they don't receive it well, they're not going to pass your audition along to the producers. And they might not call you in the next time. But if you are being smart, and let's say it's a comedy, then it might make sense to add a comedic button to the end of your audition. Otherwise, whatever you decide to say should be perfectly in tune with the scene, with how your character has been written, with whatever you understand to be the tone of the project and or the studio or the network. Because I get it. Sometimes you're auditioning for a co-star or something that has less than 5 lines, and the scene they give you feels incomplete, or it abruptly cuts off. And these can be opportunities to add a final line that are low risk. For instance, let's say you're a TV news reporter, so your scene is going to be on a television screen in a bar, and the main character is watching your news report. Well, maybe the main character walks away before the end of your report. So in the script, your last line is just a ... at the end. Should you just stop? No, you shouldn't stop talking. Go ahead and add the final line of whatever it is you were saying. It makes sense. They're going to have you record it that way anyways if you book the job, so you might as well be smart and finish that sentence in your audition. Or maybe you're in a party scene with a bunch of characters, and mid-conversation, the lead actor leaves the scene, and the camera's going to follow their action into the next part of the story. Let's say further that in the script they gave you, they've whited out the section below the end of your scene, and so it just feels like the scene abruptly stops because the main character leaves. Well, what should you do about that? Well, since you don't know what happens next, you can't be put at fault for not understanding the context of the greater scene. So go ahead and add a final line if it makes sense to sort of put a button on the scene. Because when you're on set shooting this for real, they'll likely do at least one take where the conversation between you and the other co-stars continues even as that main actor leaves. And I'm sure some of you have encountered other scenarios where it just feels like the script they gave you was incomplete. In those cases, use your best judgment or talk to your coach, acting teacher, or a trusted friend in the industry to see if it makes sense to add a line, and if so, what that should be. In the end, though, just make sure you do have some sort of closure to your performance, because this is the only time your performance is 100% in your control. If you get a callback, the casting director is going to direct you. If you get booked, the director is going to direct you. And then when it gets to the editing room, the editor is going to make even more choices that are outside of your control. So for that one moment in time, the performance is fully within your control. So take ownership of it and make sure you create a nice start, middle, and end. And yes, even if it's only one line. But that's a topic for another day. That's it for now. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on set.